And I'm so thankful for all the speakers here today, and we're going to be able to have the privilege of introducing Amy Berger.
Does anybody want to know about protein?
Yes.
If you have questions about protein, this woman is amazing.
Yes.
Okay? So I am super excited for our next speaker.
I am too. And again, somebody else that's been there, not speaking to you because it's like, wow, I'm outside of your situation. She's made a million choices to get her where she's at, and she can help. So let me introduce her. Amy Berger is an U.S. Air Force veteran and certified nutrition specialist who helps people do keto without the crazy. I love that. Not without the two crazy ketos, but we're crazy with a K. She's talking about the C crazy. She writes about a wide range of health and nutrition related topics such as insulin, weight loss, diabetes, Alzheimer's disease, thyroid function, and more. She has presented internationally on these issues and is the author of The Alzheimer's Antidote, The Stall Slayer, and co-author of End Your Carb Confusion. What a privilege it is to introduce Amy Berger.
Thank you. Good morning. Oh, thank you. How do I?
Right.
Oh. I don't know what you see. I don't see my slides yet. Oh, okay. Well, in that case, I can break the ice here. If you happen to look at the schedule ahead of time, you may have noticed that the day starts with a burger and ends with a berry. So everybody in between is just the meat in the real food sandwich. And the way to get people to stay for the entire second day of a 2-day conference is to put a big headliner at the end of day 2, and I think we can all agree they did that. All right, so I have a 60-minute talk and 45 minutes to give it, so I hope, buckle up, and I hope you've had your coffee. All right. So we're going to talk about ketogenic therapies for neurological and neurodegenerative disorders. Why should we look at ketogenic therapies, or any alternative therapy for that matter? Why do we need to explore some kind of new treatment for these conditions? Well, because this is the standard of care. Take your meds and say your prayers. That's essentially the best we have to offer these people right now. Is this for real? Is there nothing better out there that we could potentially try for these neurological and neurodegenerative conditions? Why ketogenic therapies specifically? I mean, we could try any alternative therapy. Why keto? Or any alternative? Well, conventional treatments are lackluster. They're just not that effective. If you know anyone with Parkinson's or MS or Alzheimer's, how effective are those meds? Not that great. There's treatment-resistant cases. So even when there are medications, oh, is that my earring doing that? I hope not. Okay. Even when there are, I'm going to have to take that out, aren't I? Boo! I wanted to have these pretty earrings on while I spoke, but the technology gods are telling us no. Okay. Treatment-resistant cases. So even where we have medications that are effective, they're not effective for everybody. There are some cases that just don't respond to these drugs. There's a decline in efficacy. So again, even when there's a drug that works, over time that efficacy wanes and it doesn't work so well anymore. There are side effects to the drugs. Parkinson's, because of the way the Parkinson's drugs affect the dopamine system, did you know that a potential side effect of some of the Parkinson's drugs is development of new risky behavior, compulsive gambling, compulsive, risk-seeking behavior? Okay, great, your tremor is better, but you just lost your life savings at the roulette wheel. Is this seriously the best we can do? Is there nothing better for, heaven's sake? Now, why keto specifically? Because that's why we need a different treatment. Why keto? It's because all of the conditions I'm going to talk about today have a lot in common. There's your energetics, the problems with cellular energy. You're going to hear that over and over. And keto addresses that. Keto addresses numerous factors with a single intervention. So you can address the root cause and it affects all these great things. And we know, let's say keto is one thing. Eat really, really low carb. And what can you fix? Obesity, type 2 diabetes, PCOS, acid reflux, non-alcoholic fatty liver, all these different things with one intervention. Now, this is a therapy, this is a dietary therapy that is at least 30 years in the making. What a difference 3 decades makes, right? I know most of us in the room probably remember that one on the left. The one on the right, maybe you saw it, maybe you didn't, but 30 years apart. This is not 30 years old, it's at least 50 years old. It's been 50 years since Dr. Atkins' diet revolution, and now, this year, the ketogenic, this is a textbook. This is a textbook. And this is actually the 2nd edition that's coming out this year, and I don't know if Dr. Westman's here, I think he has a chapter in this book on type 2 diabetes and obesity, so they'll just let anyone write one of those these days, won't they? No, I am kidding. I think we can all agree there's probably almost no one in the world more qualified to write that chapter. It's not just 50 years old, it's over 100 years old. This goes back to ancient times because they knew, way back in the time of Hippocrates, fasting could either prevent seizures altogether or reduce the frequency and severity. Now, that's all well and good. Okay, fasting is great, but it doesn't matter how effective fasting is if eventually you have to eat. You can only fast for so long. So they discovered around the 1920s, epilepsy researchers, that you could get pretty much almost the same effect of fasting just by keeping your carb intake very, very low. There was something unique about carbohydrate restriction that allowed you to get the metabolic benefits of fasting while actually still eating food. Now, this, I think in my opinion anyway, this we have substantiated research, and by that I mean mountains of incontrovertible scientific evidence that keto is really great for everything on this slide. I think we can kind of all agree on that. This next one, we've got emerging evidence and patient anecdotes. And all of these do have published research. It's not like we're shooting in the dark here. It's just the evidence isn't as robust yet as it is for the things like type 2 diabetes, metabolic syndrome, and all that. And actually, anyone that has lipedema, there's a virtual conference coming up for keto, specifically for lipedema and lymphedema. You can look at it. It's the Ketogenic Revolution for lipedema and lymphedema. Just search it, you'll find it. Siobhan Huggins will tell you more about that. So keto is really, really good for a wide variety of stuff. And believe me, I know that when you're in this space, you start to sound like a kook. You start to sound like a crazy person. Oh, you have migraines, have you tried keto? You want to lose weight, have you tried keto? You have diabetes, have you tried keto? Oh, you're bipolar, did you try keto? You start to sound like a snake oil salesman, right? For everything that someone has, big, small, rare, not rare, you want to tell them to try keto. And so, because the thing is, you know that saying, when all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail? Well, a very, very wise man once said, keto is a really big hammer, and there are a lot of little nails out there. Feel like I need a cigarette after that sentence, if you know what I mean. I wish I could take credit for this brilliant insight, but it's not me, it is Jeff Volek, and boy, I won't steal, but I'll introduce people to great things that I find. I just can't get over that sentence. Okay, now that we've built the foundation, let's look at the commonalities between seemingly diverse neurological and neurodegenerative disorders. And we'll build the rationale for keto. These are energy problems, and I think it's time for the glasses for a second here. It's wordy, but I think it's worth reading. Neurons are largely intolerant of inadequate energy supply, and thus, the high energy demand of the brain predisposes it to a variety of diseases if energy supplies are disrupted. Neurodegenerative diseases are not classically thought to be caused by disturbed metabolism, but bioenergetic defects are emerging as important pathophysiological mechanisms in several disorders. Bioenergetic defects, disturbed metabolism, keep those in mind. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about Alzheimer's disease, and then we'll branch out into some of the other neurodegenerative things. I wrote a book called The Alzheimer's Antidote, and I can give an hour-long talk just on Alzheimer's. You're going to get the hour-long talk on Alzheimer's in like the next 4 slides. So, if you're wondering why a keto-oriented nutritionist would have anything to say about any of this, it's because they regularly refer to Alzheimer's disease as type 3 diabetes or diabetes of the brain. Sometimes they call it brain insulin resistance. Why is that? It's because Alzheimer's disease is essentially a metabolic problem. And when I use the word metabolic, I mean it has to do with the way the brain generates energy. So the predominant abnormality in late onset Alzheimer's is a 45% reduction in cerebral glucose utilization. Your brain, depending on the source you cite, your brain accounts for only about 2% of your body weight, yet it uses 25 to 30% of all the glucose and oxygen in your body. So, if your brain is using 45% less glucose than a healthy person's brain, don't you think you might have memory problems? Don't you think you might have confusion? Don't you think you might have some personality changes? I can't see how you wouldn't. It's now widely acknowledged that brain hypometabolism accompanies Alzheimer's. Hypometabolism just means too little metabolism, not enough energy. A prominent and well-characterized feature of Alzheimer's is progressive region-specific declines in the cerebral metabolic rate of glucose. So this is progressive, right? Everybody knows you don't wake up all of a sudden one day with severe dementia. Starts, and if they actually call it mild cognitive impairment, it starts in kind of an early mild phase and it gets worse and worse over time. It's region specific. So at first, only certain parts of the brain are affected, right? You can still go about what we call the activities of daily living. You might misplace your keys, you might forget a word. Over time, as the disease spreads and gets more severe, other parts of the brain, until the whole thing is affected and you can't even take care of yourself, you can't cook, you can't bathe yourself, that kind of stuff. But it's progressive and region specific. Reductions in that regional cerebral glucose metabolic rate can be observed years before dementia onset. I wanted to make that red, but it wouldn't stand out against the purple, so just pretend like it's in red. The reduced glucose uptake in Alzheimer's is measurable in people as young as their 30s and 40s. This is not a disease of old elderly people. They used to call it old-timers disease, right? Oh, grandma's getting senile. Oh, grandpa's losing his marbles, We are now seeing people, in their 50s and 60s with early onset Alzheimer's, What's happening? We're seeing people younger and younger and younger affected, just like. Yesterday, some of the speakers mentioned we've got toddlers with type 2 diabetes. We've got toddlers with non-alcoholic fatty liver. These metabolic problems across the spectrum are happening to people younger and younger. So now the thing is, these people are cognitively normal, even though their brains are already taking up and using less glucose than a healthy brain. They're young enough and robust enough that their brain is compensating. So there's no signs and symptoms. It's only when the disease has gotten so severe and widespread that they start showing those signs and symptoms, the memory loss. But the disease process has been brewing and brewing for years, and in some cases, decades. It's only when it's bad enough to show symptoms that you know something's wrong. Now, as much as I absolutely love the phrase type 3 diabetes or diabetes of the brain, it's a little bit misleading because that sort of automatically implies there's a problem with glucose, which there is, but I think a couple of people mentioned yesterday in relation to other metabolic problems that you can be hyperinsulinemic. Your insulin can be elevated for years and years while the blood sugar is normal, right? The fasting glucose is normal, the A1C is normal. That's normal because the insulin is very high. And so even in people who do not have type 2 diabetes, if you have chronically high insulin, this is a major risk factor, if not cause, of some of these metabolic problems. So this is a gentleman named Dr. Joseph Kraft. He wrote a great book where he talked all about this, all these people who did not have diabetes but had high insulin, and it was a problem. So diabetes occurs in people with normal blood sugar. There's far too many who were told, oh, don't worry, your blood glucose is normal. Yeah, because nobody's looking at insulin, except maybe some of the doctors in this room. You could be at a normal weight, normal BMI. Your fasting blood sugar could be normal. Your fasting insulin could even be normal, and that doesn't rule out that you have hyperinsulinemia. Because let's say you're fasting, well, we all know you can be at a normal weight and have diabetes or have any of these problems, but even your fasting insulin could be normal because you wake up in the morning, it's been a few hours since you've eaten, the insulin's normal. Now let's say you have a meal. Typical American, let's say you have a bowl of cereal with skim milk and a bran muffin, half a glass of juice. Now your insulin is through the roof, and maybe it stays there most of the day. So, okay, the fasting level is normal, whoop-de-doo. Okay, it's the insulin Chronically high insulin is our canary in the coal mine. Risk of Alzheimer's doubled. They did a prospective cohort, followed some people. The risk for Alzheimer's doubled in the proportion of subjects with hyperinsulinemia and was highest in people without diabetes. So these were exactly who Dr. Kraft was talking about. These are people who they weren't diagnosed with diabetes because the blood sugar is normal, but the insulin is elevated and they had double the risk for Alzheimer's. Insulin resistance may be a marker of Alzheimer's risk associated with reduced cerebral metabolic rate of glucose and subtle cognitive impairments at the earliest stage of disease, even before the onset of mild cognitive impairment. This is the first domino to fall in this disease process. The chronic hyperinsulinemia, just like in diabetes, you can have that for years and years and years before you ever get diagnosed with anything, right? And please, make no mistake, in my opinion anyway, and this is my opinion, maybe not a fact, the memory loss, the personality changes, the behavioral disturbances we see in Alzheimer's are the symptoms. That's not the disease. The disease, the problem, the underlying disturbance is this brain glucose starvation. It is a fuel crisis, an energy shortage in the brain. The symptoms are the memory loss and the cognitive decline and all that. Okay, we've all heard of metabolic syndrome. We all know it's intimately related to chronically high insulin. The associations now between metabolic syndrome and cognitive decline and cognitive impairment are so strong that there's papers written about this now. It may be hard to see. I don't know how big it is out there, but anyone here a fan of the humor writer Dave Barry? I love Dave Barry. You know how Dave Barry always says, Dave Barry is not making this up, right? Amy Berger is not making this up. The metabolic cognitive syndrome, the insulin-resistant brain state, a metabolic approach for the management of Alzheimer's. Most of you, I'm sure, are familiar with the work of Dr. Thomas Seyfried. He talks about the metabolic approach to cancer. I think we actually have a talk on that today, later. What about a metabolic approach for Alzheimer's? Okay, now we've built the foundation, let's talk about some of these other neurodegenerative problems and see how this glucose, energy, metabolism stuff relates. The commonalities among a lot of neurological and neurodegenerative disorders that seem very different, they have a lot in common at the underlying thing. So neuronal hypometabolism that is specific to glucose. This is not unique to Alzheimer's. You'll see in a couple of slides, this is noted in almost all the neurodegenerative conditions the major ones anyway, that have been studied. So we have decreased ATP, there's a fuel starvation, there's mitochondrial dysfunction. I don't think it is, I may not have time to get into that. I think the mitochondria are protecting themselves by not taking up glucose. Hey, I'm so overloaded with glucose from the past 40 years, I don't even want anymore, leave me alone. Increased oxidative stress, often the chronic hyperinsulinemia, neuronal atrophy. Of course your neurons are going to shrink and atrophy. They're starving for fuel. It takes energy to maintain the special shape of those neurons. You don't have enough energy, they're going to degrade. Cellular malfunction, neuronal death at the end. Okay, who cares? Who cares? Why does it even matter if your neurons are not getting enough fuel? Like, what's the big deal? Well, I think I accidentally, okay. We need energy. Like I said, your brain is an energy hog, right? It uses a huge chunk of the glucose and oxygen in your body. And for some of the things on this slide, we can use any energy source. It could be glucose, it could be ketones, it could be fatty acids. Some of these, we specifically need glucose. So we do have to get a little bit of glucose into the brain. I think there's a reason your blood sugar never goes to zero, or so far as we know. So we need energy to maintain, again, I said those specialized shapes of the neurons, it takes energy to maintain those axons and dendrites. When you have nerve impulses, when you have like dopamine going out and serotonin and just, things that tell your motor neurons to fire and do the things they're supposed to do, that takes energy to send out those signals. We always talk about how important electrolytes are in keto. A lot of that has to do with electrochemical potential on the cell membranes. If that's out of whack, neurons are going to fire when they're not supposed to fire, and they're not going to fire when they are supposed to fire. That sounds like maybe a neurodegenerative problem if your neurons aren't working. So we need energy to maintain those ion gradients and those electrochemical balances. Synthesis of neurotransmitters. Everything takes energy in the body. There's no free lunch. And then a building block, there are certain compounds that your brain needs to make that can't, wait a minute, that don't cross. Yeah, so the brain needs to make certain compounds that can't cross the blood-brain barrier, but they can be made out of glucose, or in part, glucose is a contributor to these molecules. So we need to get glucose into the brain. So it is a major, major problem if the brain is starving for energy, and also specifically if it's starving for glucose energy. Okay. We built the foundation with Alzheimer's. Let's talk about Parkinson's disease, and let's see what they have in common. The dopaminergic cell loss occurs in early Parkinson's disease, with more than 50% of the putamen dopaminergic terminals having been lost before the clinical diagnosis of disease. Did we not see this in Alzheimer's disease, where that brain fuel starvation, the chronic hyperinsulinemia, goes on for years before you get a diagnosis? It has to be pretty severe to make you symptomatic enough to say, ooh, maybe I should go to the doctor, like I think something might be wrong. By the time you do that, how much have you already lost? And we see the same thing in Parkinson's. What else do we see in Parkinson's disease? Ooh, yikes, look at that. High prevalence of undiagnosed insulin resistance in what? Non-diabetic subjects. So people with normal glucose. Now, it was a small study, only 154 people. 58% of them had undiagnosed insulin resistance with a normal fasting glucose. Now, it's not really a shock. I mean, of the people that had obesity or were overweight, a large proportion of them had this undiagnosed insulin resistance. But even those at a normal weight, and I hate that phrase, that's why I have to use the air quotes, even those at a normal weight, 41% of those had undiagnosed insulin resistance. This is a huge sticking point for me personally and professionally, because there's such a bias and a stigma against heavier people in our society when your weight really says nothing about what's going on inside. You can absolutely be at a normal weight and have raging diabetes or raging hyperinsulinemia. Now, the thing is, this was diagnosed. 58% had undiagnosed insulin resistance based only on the fasting insulin. How many more, what higher percentage would have been diagnosed if we did this after a meal or after a glucose tolerance test? How many of them would have been diagnosed if we looked at more than the fasting? All right. Have you ever heard, or are you familiar that changes in your sense of smell and sometimes taste can be like early warning signs of Parkinson's? I don't want to scare anybody, because like if you're having trouble smelling, it doesn't mean you have Parkinson's, but it's just a potential really early sign. They call it the peanut butter test. I don't know why they specifically use peanut butter, except it smells delicious. You hold a jar of that up to your face and it doesn't smell like anything, it's kind of a problem. Why? Why would changes in smell have anything to do with Parkinson's, and what's going on there? Well, isn't this interesting? Look at these little tidbits I came across. Insulin transport varies among brain regions. There is insulin in the brain. The brain is an insulin necessary organ. The olfactory bulb that controls your smell and taste, the olfactory bulb has the fastest rate of transport, faster than the rate of uptake in the remaining brain. The olfactory bulb has the highest concentration of insulin protein and insulin receptors. Insulin receptors are highly abundant in the neurons, and they're highly enriched in the olfactory bulb. So if you have a problem with insulin signaling or glucose handling, maybe your sense of smell might be affected. Maybe that could be an early warning sign. Okay, again, I know it's wordy, but those of you that follow me know brevity is not my strong suit, and I just think you're gonna see that this bears reading together. There is growing evidence that a process analogous to peripheral insulin resistance occurs in the brains of Parkinson's patients, even in those without diabetes. This raises the possibility that defective insulin signaling pathways may contribute to the development of the pathological features of Parkinson's, and suggests the insulin signaling pathway may potentially be a novel target for disease modification. Get ready for this. Given these growing links between Parkinson's disease and type 2 diabetes, it is perhaps not unsurprising that drugs used in the treatment of type 2 diabetes are among the most promising treatments currently being prioritized for repositioning as possible novel treatments for Parkinson's. Let me repeat that in plain English for those of you that can't follow. Diabetes drugs for Parkinson's disease. Diabetes drugs for Parkinson's disease. If they didn't already know there was a big connection here, or a big potential connection, they wouldn't even be looking at this. Research dollars are really hard to come by, or so I'm told. It's hard to fund a study. If they didn't already know there's something here to look into, they wouldn't be doing it. Diabetes drugs for Parkinson's disease. I mean, come on. Multiple sclerosis, let's move on. What do we see here? Multiple sclerosis is typically thought of as an autoimmune condition, right? It's autoimmune attack on the myelin sheath. That's that pink stuff you see that basically insulates your neurons and helps neuronal communication happen faster. And by the way, one of the major components of myelin is cholesterol, so maybe it's not the greatest idea to have like the lowest cholesterol level you can possibly achieve, but you know, that's just my crazy insight there. What do we see in MS? Multiple sclerosis. Oh, yikes. Patients with MS had a lower, that's a radio-labeled glucose uptake in 40% of the brain compared to healthy controls. People with MS, their brains are not taking up as much glucose. The uptake of glucose, the decreased glucose in the brain correlates with the level of fatigue. Walking impairment severity with MS may be alterations in glucose metabolism. We see this again and again and again. And where have you ever heard this before? Nowhere. It's like, oh, we have no idea what's causing this. We have no idea what to do about it. We're just clueless. Okay. Ooh, isn't this interesting that we see this in newly diagnosed MS patient, hyperinsulinemia? So they did a test. They took newly diagnosed multiple sclerosis patients and healthy age matched controls, meaning people of the same age, whatever, that don't have MS. Now, they gave them an OGTT. Both groups of people had similar glucose responses to the glucose tolerance test. However, the MS patients had the increased insulin response. We see this over and over and over. It's not really the glucose that's telling the tale, but it might be the insulin. All right. Insulin resistance in multiple sclerosis patients is tied to the disease severity. N of 60, this is 64 subjects, small study. We have to start somewhere. And before I forget, like, this research is in its infancy. I don't want to try to make you feel like this is a slam dunk or we know everything. We don't. There's a lot more unanswered questions, like a lot more that we don't know than we do. But because we don't know everything doesn't mean we don't know anything. Doesn't mean we don't know something. So anyways, most of these studies are small, but we have to start somewhere. So again, fasting insulin only. 14 subjects were already above 10. Now, there's a lot of debate about what a normal or optimal fasting insulin is. I think most of us in the keto world like to see it below 10. You know, if you're in the double digits, you're kind of in trouble. And 33 had insulin resistance based on the Quanto score. A Quanto score is based on your fasting levels. Again, it's all based on fasting. Just like we saw in the Parkinson's test, how many more of these people would be diagnosed with insulin resistance if they did it after a meal? Okay, let's see how much time I have to get into this. EAE, if I remember correctly, is experimental autoimmune encephalitis. It's like the animal version of MS. It's who knows how they induce MS in a rodent, but that's EAE is the mouse or animal MS. And they've discovered that 15 to 30% of the spinal cord axons can be lost before you have permanent motor impairment. We saw this in Alzheimer's, we saw it in Parkinson's. You can have a lot of damage before there's permanent damage or before you even get a diagnosis. You've probably lost a fair percentage of those spinal cord axons before it's even bad enough for you to go to the doctor and ask questions. Now, the level of disability, so remember, MS is believed to be an autoimmune attack on that myelin, but the level of disability in MS correlates more strongly with axon degeneration and the degree of neuronal loss than with loss of that myelin. And I'm not suggesting the loss of myelin is not a problem, but what's the bigger problem? What's the first problem? Oh, demyelination is less of a problem. Now, what did we need to maintain those axons and keep those neurons viable? We needed energy. We needed ATP from where? From glucose, from fat, from ketones. We need energy. And these cells don't have them, so they're starting to degrade. And oligodendrocytes are the cells that manufacture myelin, and they have reduced metabolism. Disturbed metabolism in the myelin-producing cells is associated with the axonal dendritic. Energy, disturbed metabolism. Okay. ALS, amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, also called Lou Gehrig's disease. Some of you might know it more by that. Huntington's. There's less research on these than there are on MS and Parkinson's and Alzheimer's, but here too, we see cellular energy generation problems. Dysregulation of energetic metabolism promotes cell death and disease progression. Dysregulation of energetic metabolism. You're going to get really sick of me saying that if you're not already. Neurodegenerative cells are the sites of numerous metabolic and energetic abnormalities, with abnormalities in energy production. Energy is the primary determinant of neuronal viability. If these cells have enough energy to stay alive and function properly, they do. If they don't have enough energy, they don't have enough energy to stay alive and function properly. I'm not going to bother with that last one. Disrupted energy supply. This is co-authored by one of my favorite people in this space, Dr. John Rowe. While the mechanisms through which the ketogenic diet works remain unclear, there's now compelling evidence that its efficacy is related to the normalization of aberrant energy metabolism. The concept that many neurological conditions are linked pathophysiologically to energy dysregulation could provide a common research and experimental therapeutics platform from which the course of several neurological diseases could be favorably influenced by dietary means. Remember way back on one of my early slides, I said that keto is this one thing that can affect multiple different diseases, disorders all at once. That's exactly what they're saying here. The course of several neurological diseases could be favorably influenced by dietary means, and to one dietary mean. Now the thing is, this paper is several years old now. They say the mechanisms through which the diet works remain unclear. I disagree. They probably disagree by now. That's an older paper. Let's see. Cue the Jeopardy music, somebody. Oh, it's still going. Oh. There's 16 things, and these are only the ones we know about so far. What mechanisms haven't we even discovered yet? Now, the thing is, stay with me. Based on what you've heard so far, this energy starvation, glucose energy deficit in these neurons, if there was literally nothing else on this slide but number one, if there was only one thing on this slide, in my opinion, that would be rationale enough to try keto. If the problem is that these neurons, for whatever reason, are not taking up and metabolizing glucose properly, maybe there's like some kind of other fuel. I wonder if there's some other way that we could fuel these neurons. So if that was the only thing on this slide, you might as well try keto. But now let's look at number two. When you metabolize fatty acids and ketones molecule for molecule, you get more ATP. Wouldn't that be nice if we're starving for ATP? To the extent that hyperglycemia and or hyperinsulinemia is actually causing or exacerbating some of these problems, we know keto is a slam dunk for both of those. Fixing high blood sugar and high insulin. When you burn ketones and fatty acids, they're like a cleaner energy source, for lack of a better explanation. You produce fewer reactive oxygen species. Now, we want reactive oxygen species. Like when we talk about oxidative stress, we do need some. You don't want to have none. Like it's a signaling mechanism, and you're not supposed to have none. But we don't want so much that it overwhelms the cell's capacity to repair. So and number five, I don't remember off the top of my head if they've shown this in humans yet. They've definitely shown it in animals. Keto diets increase mitochondrial biogenesis. I think it was Cynthia Thurlow yesterday who said that the mitochondria are our cells' powerhouses. They're the energy generators. Well, if the main problem in all of these conditions is that we don't have enough energy, we're starving for energy, wouldn't it be cool if we could build more energy factories? If we could have like things that are making, wow, that'd be cool. Now look, I mean, any of these things, number 14, specific fatty acids could have different issues. Number 16, the gut microbiome. Somebody was talking very much, more than one person yesterday, about the biome and the crosstalk and the signaling. Dr. David Perlmutter writes a lot specifically about Parkinson's and the gut biome, so interesting stuff there. We just don't know, but I mean, my God, look at this. All right. Again, from Dr. Rowe, as a generalization, it's becoming widely accepted that the mechanistic underpinnings of the ketogenic diet are likely multiple, parallel, and possibly synergistic. So the question remains, can the ketogenic diet be packaged into a pill? At this stage, given our state of knowledge, the likely answer is no. Because think about it. Look at what pill can do all of this? A pill might be able to do 1 or 2. 6 pills might be able to do 6 of these if you want to take 6 pills a day. The keto diet does all of this. Name me a pill that's called a monotherapy, one intervention. Name me a pill, name me a surgery, name me a drug that's going to do all this. The keto diet does all of this. Okay. All right. Amy, I'm with you. This wow, tell me more. I'm fascinated. Does it actually work? Amy, I bet this works in rats and mice and fruit flies and yeast cells in petri dishes. Does it actually work in human beings? Let's see. So this is from a study by Stephen Cunnane, who's at Sherbrooke University in Canada. He's just a rock star Alzheimer's researcher. And his group, they looked at ketone and glucose uptake in the brain. So the top left, you've got your control. That's a healthy person, no dementia, no cognitive problems. MCI, the middle line is mild cognitive impairment. AD at the bottom is Alzheimer's disease. And the left is the glucose uptake. The right is acetoacetate. Acetoacetate is the ketone that you're measuring when you check your urine ketones. Everybody thinks that the beta-hydroxybutyrate, the one that you measure in your blood, that's like the brain ketone. And it is, but the brain also takes up and uses acetoacetate, so they happen to measure that in this study. The more red-orange you see, the more of that particular fuel the brain is taking up, or the faster it's being taken up. So if you look at the top left, the healthy brain, there's a lot of red-orange. A healthy brain has no problem taking up and using glucose. It's a healthy brain. MCI, mild cognitive impairment, there's a little less. Alzheimer's, that bottom left, there's like no red-orange there whatsoever, right? Glucose is knocking, nobody's home. Now look at the bottom right. Alzheimer's disease and the acetoacetate. There is a lot of red-orange there. That brain is lighting up like a Christmas tree on these ketones. So they concluded, not only is the brain energy deficit in mild cognitive impairment specific to glucose, but at least partially correcting the deficit with ketones results in cognitive improvements. They've done so many studies on this now with the ketogenic diet, or more so with MCT formulations or exogenous ketones, where not everybody, but many subjects have improved cognition. And it's not like 100% restored, but what they're trying to do is just partially correct that fuel deficit. If we can make up for even a little bit of that fuel starvation, what impact might that have? This was, again, the research is in its infancy. We've only got a few case studies, but this is a 68-year-old male. He did have that ApoE4 gene, which is a big risk factor for Alzheimer's. He had mild Alzheimer's on the MoCA, the Montreal Cognitive Assessment, which is a diagnostic tool for Alzheimer's. He had mild Alzheimer's. He also had type 2 diabetes. He's been using insulin for 15 years. Let's put him on a ketogenic diet for 10 weeks. Let's give him a time-restricted eating, and let's make him exercise a little bit. His MoCA goes from 23 out of 30 to 29. He goes from mild Alzheimer's to normal. His A1C comes down a lot. The the triglyceride to HDL ratio, 55% reduced. Fasting glucose is down. Fasting insulin is down like crazy. Everything is better, including the mild Alzheimer's, right? Let's look at a younger guy. Remember I said this is happening ever younger. That start of the reduced brain glucose metabolism is measurable in people in their 30s and 40s. So let's have a 38-year-old male, also positive for the ApoE4 gene. He has metabolic syndrome, and he had self-reported memory problems. He does have a family history of Alzheimer's. This guy is already running a few times a week. Let's put him on a ketogenic diet. Let's bump up the intensity of the exercise and make him lift a little bit. His MoCA score goes from 22 out of 30 to 30. He goes from cognitive impairment to normal. They actually verified his ketosis by a blood meter. Let's see. The ketone level was positively correlated with the improvement in the MoCA score. And he's got major improvements in metabolic syndrome. Now, this might be hard to see. It's kind of small. Everything is getting better. HOMA-IR is down, triglyceride to HDL, waist diet, everything's better. Fasting insulin, triglyceride. And we've got, again, he goes from mild cognitive impairment to a 30 out of 30, a perfect score on the MoCA. The thing that I want you to take away from this is that when you fix the metabolic syndrome, you fix the metabolic cognitive syndrome. And this guy's only 38, so maybe they caught it early enough. But in my opinion, this is not a coincidence. Anyone agree with me? This is not a coincidence. Now, let's see what happens in Parkinson's disease. They compared a low-fat diet to a ketogenic diet in Parkinson's disease for 8 weeks. Limitation of the study, it's majority male, but Parkinson's affects more males than females. And they did confirm ketosis. Both groups improved similarly in the Unified Parkinson's Disease Rating Scale, that's the severity for Parkinson's disease, except the ketogenic diet people improved more in the non-motor symptoms. And like Dr. Westman said yesterday, low-fat diets can work. Keto often works better. And so the low-fat and the keto worked very similarly well for the actual Parkinson's or the motor symptoms, but the keto cohort improved more in the non-motor symptoms. And if you happen to know anyone with Parkinson's or just more familiar with it, sometimes the non-motor symptoms are more debilitating and more quality of life reducing than the motor symptoms. You could have urinary incontinence, hallucinations, cognitive impairment, all this other stuff. Keto was better for improving those. Let's look at multiple sclerosis. This is not a Terry Wall study. There are other people looking into this, keto for MS. Now, okay, again, hopefully not too difficult to see. We've got a lot of metabolic parameters here. If you look here, the insulin came down an average of 5 points, not bad. A1C is down a teeny tiny bit. Triglycerides are down substantially. HDL is up, but, ooh, yikes. Ooh, what happened to that low-density lipoprotein, the LDL? I think it went up a little bit. What are we going to do about that? I don't know, but look, everything got better. Insulin, A1C, triglycerides, HDL, everything got better. LDL went up. What went down? Oh, the depression score, the fatigue score. I don't know. Maybe we don't need to worry so much about that LDL, but that's just me. Okay. If we're going to replace glucose with this alternative fuel of ketones, how do we do that? We need to get ketones into the brain, into the central nervous system. There's a lot of different ways to do that. My favorite way, and I think the most delicious way, is a low-carb or ketogenic diet. But I think we can all agree, even under the best circumstances of a young, healthy person, it's hard enough to stick to keto sometimes, let alone when you've got somebody with cognitive impairment or motor impairment. They can't be on their feet cooking all day, or they could be belligerent. The person, grandpa doesn't understand why his daughter isn't giving him his bowl of cereal. She's making him eat this omelet cooked in coconut oil. So if those who can do a keto diet, yes, please do it. You could fast. Fasting's a great way to raise ketones, but Cynthia Thurlow mentioned yesterday, fasting is not appropriate for everybody, especially if we're talking about people that are elderly and frail or already malnourished, already underweight. Please do not make those people fast. Exercise. If you exercise intensely enough, even not on a ketogenic diet, you might temporarily have a little bump in ketones. You could also use the coconut oil or MCT oil, which I'm sure almost everybody in this room knows those are special kinds of fats that are more readily converted into ketones. Again, even if you're not on a ketogenic diet, if you're eating a regular, normal, high-carb diet, if you use those oils, you will have some ketones. Same thing with exogenous ketones. Those products now, you can drink them or whatever, and it will elevate your ketones. So if we need ketones, we've got to get ketones into these people any which way we can, then do whatever you can. But in my opinion, giving the coconut oil, the MCT oil, and the exogenous ketones, while effective, and because it will close that fuel gap room, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to at least give these starving neurons some fuel. It's like bailing water out of a leaky boat without stopping to patch the hole. If the problem is the metabolic problem, and it's the hyperinsulinemia or the hyperglycemia or whatever, the exogenous ketones and the coconut oil don't correct that. The ketogenic diet might. The ketogenic diet addresses that underlying factor. Otherwise, just giving the ketones, you will help in the short term, but you're not really doing anything to address what might be, and I emphasize might, what might be a major contributing factors to the disease process. Okay, is there a window of opportunity? It's you know, you can read this on your own, but basically the gist of it is there a point of no return? Is there a point at which the disease is so severe that no matter what you do, it's not going to get better? Unfortunately, I think there is. I think there comes a point where so many neurons are lost or they're so badly degraded that you can't come back from that. But in those cases, still use the ketones, use whatever method you can, because, at least in the short term, that might improve that person's quality of life a little bit, and it might improve their caregiver's quality of life a little bit. If that person is a little more with it, a little more whatever, that's just a win. It's a win in a situation that is overall a really, really terribly losing situation. So even if it's not going to reverse the disease or stop the disease, if it can just improve it a little bit, do it. But I do think, unfortunately, there will come a time where it's just too far gone. So I hope, and I do want to emphasize this is new research, it's emerging, but I think it's really promising. So I hope that after what you've heard today, your question would not be, why would anyone try keto for these disorders? It's why would you not try keto? Why would you not? When that's take your meds, say your prayers. The existing tools aren't getting the job done, right? The drugs early on, I said they have these terrible side effects. They're not even that effective, you know, even when they do work. They don't really do anything to stop the disease, let alone reverse it at best. You get worse more slowly, but you still get worse. Existing tools are not getting the job done. I think it's time for that big keto hammer that Dr. Volek talked about. So, thank you so much for being here. Okay, thank you.